Oh, that's great.
This was the, yeah, so
Capture.
this was the bed I was talking about, the concept image, which was a collage I did to kind of explore and express the idea of what really is smart technology and how you can think about smart in a new way. And this was, I mean, you'll see from the drawings, I was really experimenting with this kind of a satirical take on so-called smart technology and really pushing it to an absurd place. So this bed, you could think of this bed as a smart bed, but it's way too smart to the point where it's actually a bit silly. So really questioning that through this project. So the site, just to give an idea and to kind of also bring in the concept of public space as well, the wider kind of idea of public space. This is a site in Bromley by Bow, as you can see, situated bang smack near Central, near the Isle of Dogs. And there's these six or seven, I think, derelict gas holders from the Victorian era, which are grade 2 listed, incredibly ornamented gas holders, which are completely disused. And it was such an interesting site because it was right next to these massive industrial site for Amazon warehouses, Asda warehouses, supermarkets, all these kind of economic nodes that were easily, you could imagine how this is a perfect site to be connecting into the city. So I was really thinking on the urban scale, not just the scale of the bed. So as you'll learn to see, you'll see from my slides, I was really experimenting with all scales. So about the site, as I said, these were grade 2 listed Victorian gas holders, and they had a very interesting connection in my eyes with all these industrial plots. And as you can see, in terms of public space, gas holders once upon a time were used as, no one really thought about them as anything special. Obviously, they had a very utilitarian use, but you see this picture, people were coming and sitting down and having a cup of tea. So really starting to question as well, what is public access today, and what are the constraints that we have today, and thinking about actually how these industrial private companies at the moment have kind of monopolized space in the city, and trying to really think about how we can get that back. But those were kind of the broader questions. As I said, I was really trying to understand how I could create a scenario, a kind of a somewhat fictional, but embedded with a level of realism, what I called the Sleep Institute, which was hopefully going to be this retreat that Londoners or commuters could go and engage with this crazy area, this crazy kind of facility that would optimize your recovery, and you kind of take a break from the hustle and bustle of the city. And so these are just some of the visuals that the project I ended with. But I'll get a little bit more into the sort of background research, which I think is a bit more relevant. So my research interests were primarily the Internet of Things, which essentially means that, the entire network of how, thinking about how the world is completely networking through the internet right now, and thinking about cities for people, and thinking about how those things kind of connect together. So a lot of you might know, and I also know there was a brilliant talk yesterday about was it yesterday? I think yesterday, right? Yeah, talking about cycles and their the way they've transformed the city. I'm sure you guys know that pedestrianization has become an incredibly popular thing. It's becoming, our society has seen the value of creating space for the public to reoccupy the city and go from an automobile centric planning model to one that prioritizes the people in public space. And this is just an example of the transformation that took place in Times Square. And here are some other. Here's another example in Stroge, where the streets have been completely transformed to start to prioritize what is actually valuable to us as a population, which is being able to engage with each other and have space. But I started also interrogating the timeline of how cities transform. And obviously now we're, some highly developed cities, cities that have existed for centuries, they're able to reach this kind of, this level of pedestrianization in public space. But there are other models of cities which are a bit younger, let's just say, like Dubai, for example, where I actually lived for 5 years, where they've gone into this rapid, they've gone through this rapid development of, a desert essentially into this massive cosmopolitan urban jungle. And I think what's apparent there is it shows you that how age of a city and the maturity of a city is something that plays quite an important role in where they reach with their public space or urban planning. London itself is one of those cities, I think, which has a highly mature, it's a very old city. And therefore, it looks, interestingly, it doesn't look like much has transformed in terms of the development of London. Obviously, it's much tall towers now, but London has always been a very highly populated and urban area for a very long time. So you guys probably know of Jan Gehl. If you don't, he's played one of the most critical roles in creating more emphasis for the urban scale, prioritizing people. He's caused, I think he's played probably the biggest role in pedestrianization in modern day planning. So these were all the kind of initial things I was looking at. But then, as I said, I started to really question what is actually smart, because while you might think that smart cities is not really related to what I've been showing you, funnily enough, we have now reached a point where we've passed, we've gone through the whole like prioritizing public space, prioritizing people, and now we've reached a point of smart cities because technology has reached a point at which this is where innovation now lies. So I started to also question, now what is smart cities? And what I realized was, as I showed you, for example, Dubai, what started off as a really pastoral place. You think about London, in the 17th century, it was a pastoral landscape. But then, what happens in the way cities develop is they go from pastoral to rural to eventually townships. Then they become modern cities. And modern cities is where you saw all those cars, because modernism was essentially the introduction of, speed, machines, and people went crazy for cars as well, because that was also a place of high innovation. And then we now have what's so-called a smart city. And there are two routes that cities now take in the smart city era, which we are in right now. And some of those cities will take a human-centric approach, as you saw in Stroge, as you saw in Copenhagen, as you saw in pockets of other Western countries. But some cities take a technocentric approach, which you see most definitely, I think, in places in China. You see in places now in Canada and places in London. So we are in this era at the moment. We're in this kind of battle of how do you create a city that works for everyone, but also technology is playing a huge role in dictating that. So with these two kind of the split of human-centric and technocentric city, I started to also realize that in this framework, in terms of well-being, which is one of the primary factors of our place in the city, human-centric city obviously is way better for your well-being, and a technocentric city is definitely bad. And we're all privy to these kind of these speculations by famous novelists about the route in which our cities are developing, the kind of the trajectory in which our cities are going. In 1984, George Orwell speculating on a dystopic kind of dystopic future for the city where everything was being listened to and dictated in this kind of subliminal, scary way. And crazily, weirdly enough, much of this is a reality today. But also Thomas More's Utopia. What is Utopia? What is the most beautiful, amazing city in the world? It's very easy to talk about the nightmare situation, but I think it's a bit more, it's much more difficult to talk about what is good. So this dichotomy was where my project kind of began from, and thinking about what is the worst case scenario, what's the best case scenario. And so You also saw one of the primary factors that I was using to kind of gauge the success of this project and the success of cities was based on well-being. And so I had to kind of narrow my concept down to what is well-being, what's a way of kind of measuring well-being. And sleep and restoration was a very interesting trajectory, or very interesting aspect of well-being that I became interested in. Because obviously I'm not going to tackle well-being as a whole. I think that would be an insane project to take on in your master's. So I focused on sleep and restoration. I mentioned to you guys I did a podcast series, and in a very selfish way, I must admit, the podcast was a great way for me to fuel my understandings and fuel my knowledge building. And so in the middle of my course, I invited an environmental psychologist from the University of Surrey, Dr. Eleanor Radcliffe, to come and basically give me ideas. She didn't know she was doing that, but yeah, she was basically giving me my brief. No, it was incredible. I really tried to question and ask her about the actual, her research, by the way, is highly, highly acclaimed. She's contributed some really important research relating to the restoration and the effect of nature and specific aspects of the environment that can improve the restorative effect on our minds and bodies. And she has, she did all the evidence for this. So this podcast episode was literally me grilling her, me really getting to the depths of asking, can architecture, can the environment actually change our behavior? Can it actually improve our health? Like, seriously. So who better to speak to than a scientist who had evidence? And it was an incredible episode. And I learned that altering our environments can have an effect on our behavior and emotions. And architecture and its capacity to vary sensory experience can cause measurable improvements to our well-being. So this really helped my smart city kind of narrative, where I thought if I can bring in aspects of improving well-being, bringing in nature, but also remembering as well the crazy, the absurdity, the crazy situations as well, as you'll see from the drawings, trying to really work that into this concept. So I started, as I said, with this bed, and the bed, I thought, if I start from the smallest scale possible, and then build my way up to the city, I'll probably have a very reliable framework. So if this can work for a bed, it can work for a city. And so I thought, okay, let's make this bed highly responsive, absurdly responsive, to the point where it's too smart. So this bed, as you can see, these drawings inspired by Heath Robinson, is an adaptable bed mechanism that can measure it plugs into your phone data, so it knows how much noise you make when you sleep, and therefore it can recognize your snoring patterns. And by the way, this technology does exist in your phone right now. You have a speedometer that measures your movement in bed if you have an Android phone, and if you've got the sleep app when you're on an Apple, it's got an audio sensor which measures how the breaks in between your breathing, and therefore knows how deep you sleep, and therefore it knows what time that you have your deepest sleep, and therefore it can figure out your sleep pattern and the optimal environment for your sleep. So thinking on that, based on that, and I could go really deep into all the other sensory kind of aspects that I plugged into this, but that will take too long. I created this crazy bed and started to develop that. I actually built the bed in some ways with a mechanical model that was actually able to move through a motor and was hooked up to a sensor. So if you touched the bed, it would fold up. And it was just there as a kind of conceptual artistic model to express the concept. But then, how do you turn that into a city? Well, I think first step is turn the bed into a bedroom. So these sketches kind of show, on the left, you're seeing the kind of, again, an artistic expression of how this bed is picking up all of your sensory inputs and creating an environment that responds best to you. Whether that be saying, X person, who have we got here? I'll use this as an example. Okay, Ursula, during sort of 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. is the time she starts to move the most. Therefore, she's going to be coming out of her REM sleep pattern, and therefore we can start to initiate the nature sounds and wake her up in a very gradual way. And this technology actually exists in your phone as well, by the way. You can get apps that do this. You get the gist. Anyway, that bed then transformed into a bedroom. And I was exploring through this kind of intangible drawing methods, what that room could be like. And then, do you want to guess what the bedroom turned into? The bedroom turned into a house. So smart bed, smart room, smart house. And this is the expression, the drawing I did to kind of express how that idea can be implemented in a completely in the other kind of spaces in a house. So what you have here is a toilet, which is connected up to a TV, which is connected up to a Netflix kind of iconography thing. So it's just basically showing you this idea of this absurdly smart home. Over here on the right, we've got a kitchen that is connected up to a Tesco conveyor belt that delivers food straight to your pantry. It's all a bit absurd, isn't it? And then from the house, smart house, to a smart neighborhood, and from a smart neighborhood to a smart city, really thinking about the absurdity of smart technology. And then I started to actually map the project and think about, at what point of a day of an average person who wakes up, this is essentially a psychogeographical map that shows the time somebody wakes up, what apps are they using, what companies are they going to, how much data. It's a data map. It's I called it urban data trace. There you go. So it's essentially seeing, by the way, apps can do this to you right now. If somebody downloads your entire data trace, they'll be able to see at what time you were able to get, at what time a specific set of data was collected on a specific day. So all of this was being developed. And then obviously the architecture comes, and I started to then think about how the architecture would develop into something more tangible. And I'll go through these slides a bit quicker because I'm just wary of the time. And then, thinking about, what you saw before, they were all very conceptual ideas, but then thinking about how you could create an actual structural kind of version of all of these ideas. And so I started to develop this into a kind of a pod, which I called the rest pod, which was a recovery pod that you could imagine was situated in the middle of, at the middle of the city, where the same way you would go and maybe scan an Uber bike or go and stay in a Premier Inn, maybe you go and rent this pod out for the night and get the best night's sleep of your entire life. So then the concept tried to think about ways in which, again, you could scale this up, because at the moment we've only reached a pod, but then that pod would then transform and become a master plan. So I started to really investigate the site even more, and started to think about the constraints I have and how you could actually create a program that worked on a much larger level. This is just mapping out all of the modular construction that goes into creating this pod, thinking about the site and how you could actually create a site that produced all of the architectural elements and also was able to kind of distribute the architectural elements to create the master plan. So really trying to think about now, as you could probably tell, this is becoming a bit less absurd. And that was the kind of the point of this project, to go from those crazy conceptual, absurd ideas and start to bring in an element of realism. And so I went back to the research that Eleanor Ratcliffe provided me with. And this is her independent research right now that you're looking at, where I told you she had some acclaimed research, and that research was thinking about, she actually measured, she did through some actual experiments, she measured the effect of native bird sounds on the restorative effect for humans. I won't go through the entire experiment, but what she found, her findings were that native birds, the birds that you grew up around, in the UK, magpies, pigeons, and robins, their sounds had a restorative effect to people. And so what that showed me, and based on other research I'd collected extensively, that nature played, surprise, surprise, nature played a primary role in increasing our well-being. And so I started to develop this program for these for these gas holders, which I explained to you before, where I wanted to create 3 distinct environments, which sequentially took you through a process of crazy, absurd, overly technocentric environment, providing you with a level of well-being, but then eventually normalizing you to nature. So the whole point of this being that if you were this person who was obsessed with your phone and you're obsessed with social media and you're lost in the noise of the city, you come to this retreat and you get washed up and cleaned up and sent back with a whole new, recalibrated mindset and at one with nature. So this was Immersion Stage One, as I called it, which was in reverse. Actually, this is the stage that you left in. So this is the stage in which it was completely nature oriented, and I designed this kind of cage-like structure around the gas holder, which, similar to a Faraday cage, is able to block any signals coming in or going out. So your phone would not work in this architectural intervention. And the proposal itself. Oh, sorry. Okay, so this was the second stage, and the second stage was it was the kind of the neutral stage. This is actually most reflective of how our urban environment is right now, which is kind of not completely devoid of technology, obviously, but it has a fair balance. We were able to go out into nature, at least I can in Kent. I don't know about you Londoners, but you're not lost in the technology of the world, although some people are. But this immersion stage was the neutral stage. And then the final stage, or I should say the first stage, was Immersion Stage 3, which looks a bit scary. And it is, because it was the stage in which you would enter it and you would be completely isolated in this pod, but the pod would feed you the most amazing stimulations and simulations to give you an immense level of well-being. But it was, again, a satirical take on what a technocentric world would look like. So this was the master plan to kind of give you an idea of the scale of the development that I was proposing. So you've got the 3 immersion stages here, but you also have some other general accommodation and the production site and production facilities. So Immersion Stage One, which, as I said to you, would be the last stage, the one that you leave in. Let me start with the last one just so it makes more sense. So the first stage was Immersion Stage, this one. So it was essentially a proposal for a pod that you enter. And as I think I already mentioned this, but let's just go through this one a bit quicker. This was Immersion Stage 2, the neutral aspect. And then this was Immersion Stage 1, which is the one you left in. And so the architecture differs greatly, and the interventions in these architectural sites were very different as well. So yeah, I mean, I ended up with this, as I said, this master plan, which created this environment, which, as I said, was almost, well, it was featured on Design Boom. I think I like the way they described it. They said it was a proposal for the world's largest living labs facility. And it really was that. I mean, I must admit, it's an incredibly complicated project. And sometimes I feel, are people actually understanding what I'm saying? Am I just waffling? But I was really proud of this project. And for me, it was a chance for me to really get all of my ideas out into this kind of fictional project that would ask larger questions about society, ask larger questions about public space, and think about what the future of our cities could actually be. Because right now we're in this really crucial time of thinking about how our cities, how our public spaces are going to be optimally used in the future. And smart cities is going to be part of the conversation. They are part of the conversation. Big companies like Google, Sidewalk Labs, MIT, Institution of Technology, they're experimenting right now. So we're going to see the next level of cities come in the future. And who knows what it's actually going to be. And this whole project was trying to explore, could you find a nice balance between the technocentric city and the human-centric city? And I don't know. At the moment, I'm not really sure what the solution is. But what I do know is I've spent a long time questioning it. And weirdly enough, my dissertation was actually tied to this. So I questioned this even further. And as I said, I didn't come to an answer, but I did come to a few conclusions in where I think it should not go. And there's a very strange irony. And it's that man who I showed you at the beginning, Jan Gehl, and this is going to be controversial, so trigger warning for people. That man called Jan Gehl, who was essentially the key humanist planner of the modern day of 21st century, who introduced the ideas of modern cities being human-centric. I wrote a dissertation on how he incidentally, without any intention, created the beginnings for a technocentric city. So this is a bit of a kind of a strange kind of how do I say it? There's a bit of an eerie finish to this. And here's a quote that I got from Jan Gehl's from one of Jan Gehl's books, and it says, "In order to observe people's movements over a large area or for a longer time, observers can discreetly follow people without their knowing it, or follow someone who agrees to be followed. This is also called shadowing." So it seems like a very simple thing, and someone could easily take that out of context. But my research had shown that through his methods of field research, he actually began to introduce the idea of collecting data on people, and collecting data on people sometimes without their permission, as you can see here. And so this idea, this intention of doing good for people became something that eventually became Cambridge Analytica. It became the Facebook controversy. It became, Sidewalks Labs failures, where they were creating surveillance capitalism. So what I kind of want to leave this talk with is thinking, is to kind of put more of an emphasis on critical thinking around some of the ideas that seem to be so good today, and think about actually, I really do believe that architects play a role in interrogating these concepts, because through doing an architectural project that really went deeply into exploring the absurdities of this technology, and also exploring a potential future for this, and thinking about it from the scales that architects do think about it, I uncovered things that I think are really important for the public space and for people's rights, people's data rights. I think where that leaves me, and where that kind of leaves my view on what is the future of smart cities and the future of public space as it is I guess thinking that the answers are still out there, that no, we don't have a solution at the moment. But one thing for sure is we need to really be cognizant about how we deal with not just the physical space, but also the digital space, the virtual space. And so if I am to give you any hints of solutions, any hints of answers, I would say smart cities, and by extension, public space, planning for public space, is about public empowerment. It's about being nature immersed, remembering that nature is key to humans' well-being. And also that it's a multidisciplinary process of planning and designing these cities with everyone involved, with architects involved, with psychologists involved. And yeah, I think that's where I'll leave it at this. The scan QR codes there again, if you want to check out my website. And I think I'm on time, hopefully.